Allen Ginsberg Beat Generation, Full History, Real Story. The night was heavy with smoke. A dim lamp glowed in a cheap New York apartment, its yellow light flickering over stacks of notebooks, torn cigarette cartons, and half-finished cups of black coffee. In the middle of the mess sat Allen Ginsberg, hunched over a typewriter, pounding the keys with an urgency that was less about poetry and more about survival. "America," he muttered under his breath, as if arguing with the walls, "you've given me nothing but madness, and yet everything I write is about you." Allen wasn't born into glory. His roots were tangled in the immigrant struggles of Paterson, New Jersey. His father, Louis Ginsberg, was a schoolteacher and a poet of modest reputation. His mother, Naomi, was brilliant but consumed by mental illness. Young Allen grew up watching her wrestle with paranoia, breakdowns, and institutions, her fragile mind always on the verge of collapse. For Allen, poetry wasn't just art, it was oxygen. Writing became his only way to make sense of the chaos that life hurled at him. The Awakening. At Columbia University in the 1940s, Allen's world cracked wide open. There he met Jack Kerouac, the restless drifter with eyes like a storm, and William S. Burroughs, sharp, cold, and dangerously intelligent. Together they formed the core of what would later be called the Beat Generation, though none of them could have imagined that title in the beginning. They were young men angry at the hypocrisy of America, the wars, the conformity, the way people were taught to chase money while their souls withered. Instead of following the path their parents dreamed for them, they haunted jazz clubs, experimented with drugs, and scribbled poetry that sounded like confessionals screamed into the night. Allen, with his wide, haunted eyes, was the prophet of the group. He felt everything too deeply: the pain of his mother, the violence of society, the loneliness of being a gay man in a country that called it a crime. The fall into shadows. But the road to greatness was paved with breakdowns. One night, while wandering the city, Allen was picked up by police for harboring stolen goods, something small, something stupid, but enough to derail his life. Instead of prison, he was sent to a psychiatric hospital. There, surrounded by the truly broken, he stared into the rawest corners of human suffering. He saw the future of America in those cracked, trembling hands, in the voices muttering in the dark. It was there, in the hospital's oppressive silence, that Allen swore he would write the truth, no matter how obscene, no matter how shameful. The poem that shook the nation. In 1955, in San Francisco, Allen finally unleashed what had been burning inside him. The poem was called Howl. I saw the best minds of my generation destroyed by madness, starving, hysterical, naked. When he first read those words aloud at the Six Gallery, the room shook. People didn't just hear poetry, they felt a confession, a scream, a revelation. It was the sound of a generation refusing to bow to silence. But America wasn't ready. The poem was called obscene, dirty, dangerous. Publishers faced obscenity trials. Allen was dragged into the heart of a cultural war he had never asked for. But he stood tall. On the witness stand, critics tore into his work, saying it was filth. But supporters, professors, critics, ordinary readers argued it was art, it was truth, it was necessary. When the judge ruled in Ginsberg's favor, it was more than just a legal victory, it was a declaration that free expression had a place in America, even if it made the country uncomfortable. The Beat Prophet. From then on, Allen wasn't just a poet, he was a prophet of the counterculture. He marched against the Vietnam War, stood with Martin Luther King Jr. and spoke out for gay rights long before it was safe. He believed America's soul was sick, but he also believed it could be healed. Yet fame never erased the shadows. His mother Naomi's death haunted him. Her last years in an asylum were a wound he could never close. Allen's homosexuality, though he embraced it, made him an outsider in a nation that condemned men like him. And behind his thunderous public readings, there were nights of crippling doubt, of loneliness so deep it threatened to swallow him whole. Jack Kerouac drank himself to death. William Burroughs spiraled deeper into addiction. Many of their friends overdosed, disappeared, or lost themselves in the haze of broken dreams. The Beat Generation, once so alive, began to resemble a graveyard. But Allen endured. He kept writing, kept teaching, kept marching. While others collapsed, he became a survivor, a witness to what America did to its visionaries. The unexpected twist. In the late 1960s, at the height of the counterculture movement, Allen was invited to the Democratic National Convention in Chicago. He thought it would be poetry and protest. Instead, it was blood. Police beat protesters in the streets. Tear gas filled the air. Allen, standing in the chaos, began to chant Buddhist mantras, his voice trembling yet unbroken, trying to calm the storm with words. That image, Allen Ginsberg, chanting against violence, would become a symbol of the era. He wasn't just a poet anymore. He was a witness, a conscience, a reminder that words could resist bullets. The final years. By the time the 1980s arrived, Allen had become both respected and controversial. Universities invited him to teach. Presidents despised him. Young poets adored him. The man who once faced jail for his words now filled lecture halls across the country. Yet his body began to fail. Friends were dying from AIDS, and Allen, too, grew sick. In 1997, knowing his time was short, he wrote one last poem, Things I'll Not Do, Nostalgias. It wasn't angry. It wasn't even sad. It was tender, full of gratitude and farewell. When Allen Ginsberg died in April 1997, the streets of New York filled with his friends, his students, strangers who had memorized his poems. They lit candles, read his words aloud, and for one brief moment, it felt like the Beat Generation still lived. The legacy. Allen Ginsberg's story isn't just about poetry. It's about America itself, the madness and the beauty, the violence and the hope. He came from the shadows of immigrant struggles, from a home marked by mental illness, from a society that wanted to silence him. And yet he spoke. His words weren't polished or polite. They were raw, ugly, and alive. They reminded America of its wounds and its possibility for redemption. And that is the real story of Allen Ginsberg, not just the poet of the Beat Generation, but a man who dared to howl against the silence. 0150